Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me be here today. I said, my name's Georgia. I'm a first year medical student here, recent graduate at Queen's, which is where I conducted this research with Dr. Susan Bartels and also Dr. Speenley, and then our partner, Sandrine Lusamba. So this is a study titled, "It Was With My Consent Since He Was Providing Me with Money, Adolescent Perspectives of Peacekeeper Perpetrated Sexual Exploitation and Abuse in the Democratic Republic of Congo." And this is a 2018 cross-sectional study examining local perceptions of interactions between MINUSCO personnel and women and girls in the DRC. The study focuses particularly on responses from participants aged 13 to 17, so our adolescent age group. For a bit of background, the Democratic Republic of Congo, or the DRC, is a sub-Saharan African country with a history of Belgian colonization, ongoing post-independence conflicts, high rates of poverty, and intertwined with sexual and gender-based violence. And in part due to this, it's also been host to two of the largest UN peacekeeping missions in history. So this was MINUC, or UN Organization Mission in the DRC, which was active from 1999 to 2010, which has now been succeeded by MINUSCO, which is the UN Organization Stabilization Mission in the DR Congo, which has been active since 2010. So sexual exploitation and abuse, or SEA, of civilians by UN peacekeepers is recognized as an endemic issue within peacekeeping operations. Sexual exploitation is defined by the UN Secretariat as any actual or attempted abuse of a position of vulnerability, differential power, or trust for sexual purposes. And sexual abuse is the actual or threatened physical intrusion of a sexual nature, whether by force or under unequal or coercive conditions. MINUC and MINUSCO have both been marred by allegations of SEA. And SEA within peacekeeping settings can include sexual assault, trafficking, forced prostitution, child pornography, abduction, transactional sex, and networked SEA. So in the DRC, transactional sex is highly prevalent. And transactional sex is also called survival sex. This includes the exchange of sex for money, food, or jobs, and includes a degree of agency, although not for adolescents in terms of being under the age of consent. It's important to note that the UN has a zero tolerance policy towards any sort of sexual relationships between peacekeepers and civilians. However, this hasn't been enough to prevent these abuses and differentials of power. So the objective of this study is to highlight the perspectives of Congolese adolescents who have been left out of academic discourse and to call for accountability and equity in peacekeeping partnerships by the United Nations in addressing SEA. Data was collected for this study using SenseMaker, a cross-sectional mixed methods data collection tool. And so using this tool, participants get to tell an anonymous story about a topic of interest. These are called micronarratives. They then go on to interpret their own story and using a series of dyads or triads on a smartphone or a tablet with a SenseMaker application on it. And this tool is a more natural way for people to communicate complex ideas and helps mitigate traditional qualitative or mixed methods researcher bias. Data was collected across 6 UN bases, which are highlighted on the map here in the slide in 2018, and participants shared and interpreted narratives about the experiences of Congolese women and girls in relation to MINUSCO personnel. Stories were audio recorded in Swahili or Lingala by trained research assistants and then were translated for analysis. In the mixed methods analysis, we chose to look at specifically adolescent data. So that was stories from the 13 to 17-year-old age group. At the quantitative level, we looked at patterns of perspectives identified from dyads and triads to understand how adolescents responded in comparison to older age groups. We then took the adolescent stories, so the qualitative data, and underwent thematic analysis. So it's important to note here, I'm only presenting here one representative triad of our results. It's quite a complex issue and a long paper, so I do have a QR code at the end if anybody's interested in seeing the full results in the published paper. So this is a triad. Triads require participants to move a marker between 3 options placed within a triangle, as we see here. And then for triad data, 95% confidence intervals are generated for the geometric mean of each subgroup. These are represented as confidence ellipses. So these are these ellipses on the screen here. So this triad is about the positionality of the UN or MINUSCO personnel. So the question is, in this story, the foreign UN or MONUSCO personnel was, and then participants would place their marker between any of these 3 points. And if we can see here, this is a 13 to 17-year-old ellipse, and we see that it's not overlapping with any of the other age subgroups, so the responses from other ages. And this indicates that this is a statistically different response. And this is towards more able to offer protection rather than able to offer financial support. And if we disaggregate it by gender, as we see on the right half of the slide here, we see that the male participants in particular, male adolescent participants, are driving this result. And to visualize these results, I have a few stories because each of these dots does represent a story from an adolescent or a participant. So this one is from a male participant, and it says, the young lady was the friend of an Uruguayan of MONUSCO. She was loved by them, and presently she has no child, but they continue to be friends. They're only helping her to pay school fees. So that would be under the qualitative theme of poverty. Another narrative from a female participant says that the guys of MONUSCO give money to girls who accept to show them their breasts. When the chief is absent, they do stupid things like asking girls to show their breasts in exchange for gifts, food, or money. And this is from the subtheme transactional sex and sex work. So to contextualize these results, we went on to analyze the stories shared by adolescents, and that led to those quantitative interpretations. And from these stories, we have 3 main themes. So poverty being a motivating factor in terms of how these interactions begin, material and financial gain through transactional sex and sex work as modes of SEA that were highly prevalent within the narratives, and then support-seeking actions post Peacekeeper perpetrated SEA that are reliant upon the women or girl. And to summarize our key findings, adolescents were significantly more likely to indicate that MONUSCO personnel offered protection, that interactions were sexual in nature, and that transactional sex work and sex work were highly prevalent within our narratives. Quantitative results were driven by male adolescent participants, and thus youth may perceive monetary or material food benefits in response to sexual interactions with UN peacekeepers as protection or protective in nature. And our results illustrate how SEA can be interpreted as protective or supportive by youth facing poverty. Poverty being a critical underlying factor contributing to SEA is quite consistent with the existing literature on the topic right now. But our research provides an interesting nuance in terms of the adolescent perspective and the increased vulnerability that adolescents face in these settings. Adolescents are particularly vulnerable to transactional sex and sex work. So thus, the male adolescent perception that peacekeepers were able to offer protection through sexual relationships must be interpreted within the context of poverty and the inherent gendered nature of protection in peacekeeping. And to conclude here, with some future directions on this topic, addressing SEA must be a collective effort at the community and institutional level and not left up to solely UN mandates. Peacekeeper training and survivor-centered reporting must be paired with initiatives for socioeconomic empowerment of women and girls, and further research is needed to understand how gender norms influence adolescent perceptions of SEA, as this was a very qualitative, very exploratory study, I should say. And as a final note that I want to leave everyone with, this isn't just a peacekeeper issue, it's not just a UN issue. It's quite endemic within the aid industry as a whole, which I think as people who are interested in global health, it's really important to be aware of and help fight against these issues. So thank you so much for having me. This is the QR code for the full paper and my contact info.